get to it. Hello everybody. Do you want to know a fun fact? According to the Bible, it's a sin to wear a shirt woven of 2 different fabrics, or materials. So, in other words, all of you are going to hell. Religion is a very, very complicated topic, and one of the things that everyone tries to avoid discussing. It's so goddamn controversial. Well, I am discussing it today, though I believe that what I'm going to say isn't particularly controversial, because I believe it's quite objective. Religion and horror is a really, really interesting topic to me. The idea of taking something that's supposed to be like, oh, be pure and be rewarded for good deeds and all that, and turning it into something sinister, or using it to, make a story about something sinister more interesting, is something that I think is really, really cool. And also, religious people's response to just generally creepy, sinister shit, like horror. Religion and its relationship with horror is something very complicated and wildly interesting to me, and I'd like to talk about it a little bit to celebrate the wonderful day of Easter, shall we? So to start off this discussion, I like to discuss a couple movies that are controversial for its religious handlings. Starting with the film Alucarda. Apologies if I butchered that pronunciation. Alucarda is a 1977 film directed by Juan Lopez Moctezuma. I'm sorry, man. I don't know how to say that. Juan Lopez is pretty easy, but Moctezuma. I'm just gonna call you Juan Lopez for the duration of this video if I have to say your name again, because that's a mouthful. Change your name. Be like Jack Black or something. I think that's taken. So, the letterboxed plot synopsis of Alucarda is a young girl's arrival at a convent after the death of her parents marks the beginning of a series of events that unleash an evil presence on the girl and her mysterious new friend, an enigmatic figure known as Alucarda. Demonic possession, Satan worship, and vampirism follows. Yeah, so as you can imagine, this film is wildly controversial, especially at its release in 1977. The film, yes, it follows the person as they go to the convent, and it's a very, very unusual film. It's rather slow-paced, but ultimately it culminates in a demon-summoning ritual with 2 ladies cutting each other's chests with knives and saying the famous lines, basically, those are the magic words that give them magical, demony shit, and they get, tied up and beaten and tortured by the convent because, religion's very peaceful, and all sorts of shenanigans happen. It's a very cartoonishly extreme ending to the film. There's blood, there's fucking death everywhere. It's a hell of a watch. So I want to talk a little bit about its reception, though. Now, while there isn't that much information about Alucarda's reception from religious folk, because it was a rather underground film, it has been banned in multiple countries. These countries have not been specified, to my knowledge, but it has been banned from some countries that were likely very, very religious. I'm also going to discuss the horror film The Exorcist, which is monumentally more well-known. In 1973, William Friedkin's The Exorcist was released, and it shook people to their core. To this day, it's considered one of the most terrifying horror films out there, and it's definitely one of the most beloved, despite what my editor thinks on the movie.
Screw the Exorcist.
There's a good try. The Exorcist's depiction of demonic activity was very, very daring for its time, and especially for a widely released film. It wasn't some underground little cult movie. This was hitting a lot of theaters, and a lot of people were seeing it, and naturally, there was a ton of outcry. Before I get into the reception among people who weren't a big fan, I will quickly read you the plot synopsis in case you live under a damn rock. 12-year-old Regan McNeil begins to adapt an explicit new personality as strange events befall the local area of Georgetown. Her mother becomes torn between science and superstition in a desperate bid to save her daughter, and ultimately turns to her last hope, Father Damien Carus, a troubled priest who's struggling with his own faith. So, The Exorcist, as I just had said right before giving the plot synopsis, faced a ton of controversy, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. People accused The Exorcist of glorifying Satan, and supposedly it began hysteria among women, which led to the film worry that the film might cause severe emotional problems, especially people that believe in demonic possession. Thanks to the BBFC for telling me that, I guess. The Exorcist was banned in many countries, like Alucarda. A lot of countries like to ban these weird, dark, religious-centered horror movies, don't they? The Exorcist was banned in Australia for a decade, Iceland for more than a decade, 14 years, Norway for 23 years, West Germany for 4 years, and Sweden for all the way up to 2001. I do find the Norway one amusing, especially because, thinking about it, they unbanned it in 1997, and in the 1990s, all the mayhem and Dark Throne and birds and stuff was happening, and all the church burnings and whatnot, so I do find that kind of amusing. The Exorcist was, obviously, as I just said, very, very controversial. Some people even believe that there was real demonic shit going on set because people, died after the recording and stuff, so, very, very controversial movie as a result. What is it that makes religion such a popular topic to discuss in horror films? Why is it that it works so well? Well, I think it's similar to why recently there's been a lot of things where, it turns kid cartoons into horror, such as, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey being an example of it not being done so well, but even stuff like Bendy and the Ink Machine, supposed to be cartoon. This type of stuff, it relies on taking something that's supposed to be about purity, and it reminds you of innocence, and it twists it and turns it into something dark. So as a result, I think that it makes for really good horror, turning this pure thing into this very, very evil thing. It makes people squirm. It makes a lot of people scared. On top of that, horror is built upon pushing limits and trying to make people uncomfortable. And what better to do than take a stab at or utilize one of the most controversial subjects out there. I really do wish that these movies received less controversy. It sucks that just no one can sit down and have a rational discussion or simply say that I don't believe this movie is for me, it offends me. I don't understand why we have to go out into the streets holding signs saying fuck this movie, ban this movie. It's idiotic. It's unfortunate. It's really sad that we, as humans, feel the need to be so close-minded. I'm never not going to say horror and religion are an inseparable thing that I believe is very, very interesting and useful. And, movies are still using it to this day to create, tension and create controversy. Even something more mild like Wreck, taking a demonic twist at the end. But there's tons of more recent movies that have gone farther and farther and farther. Religion is one of the most controversial subjects out there, but it's bonded with horror, and it has been for a long time, and it forever will be. Now it's time to discuss one of the events that had one of the biggest impacts on the horror scene in the history of horror. In the 80s, the satanic panic hit. Suddenly, worried parents were terrified that their children were worshipping Satan, whether they knew it or not, and began to throw out AC/DC vinyls and all these comic books and Dungeons and Dragons. All of this was viewed as devil worship. Horror creators saw this as the perfect opportunity to begin pushing some limits. The 80s was one of the greatest decades for horror, no doubt. Constantly, movies were being pumped out. Franchises like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street all came from this time period. And with the controversy coming from these religious fanatics it not only got them more money because, oh, my parents told me not to, so a bunch of rebellious, edgy teenagers wanted to go see it, but also just the controversy really pushed people to talk about it, and talk is what a movie needs. And it's kind of true that no publicity is bad publicity for a filmmaker. So, as these films grew more and more big and more limits were pushed, the 80s was an ever innovative time for horror, and limits were destroyed, and people, parents, were terrified. Religion and horror has had a relationship like that for a long time, but the 80s was the peak of that, and I feel like it was worth the mention. I just wanted to take advantage of this day to talk about it. Before I leave, I'd like to read you one of the most interesting Bible quotes. To me, at least. This is Timothy 2:12. I do not let woman teacher take authority over a man. They must be quiet. That's not a good quote, is it? Well then, I ought to get Anno Domin out of here, because I don't really want to deal with crazy people on Twitter. So I'm going to shut up now, but I wish you all a very happy Easter. See ya!